Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today, we're checking out the new Radeon RX 7600. This little guy right here. Kind of a cute little graphics card, but like NVIDIA's recently released RTX 4060 Ti, there's a pretty decent product here, but it is unfortunately poorly priced. And worse still, AMD has had two shots at pricing this thing. There was a very late pricing update, which meant we had to scrap half of our video and start over again. So thank you very much for that, AMD, but at least you guys, well, those of you interested in this do get a small discount. So maybe me having to stay up late and redo half of my review will be worth it. But anyway, we have a lot to cover here. Of course, we're going to dig in and find out just what we think this thing's worth and whether or not you should buy it. But before we get to any of that, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Skytech Gaming, a provider of pre-built gaming PCs in California. They offer lifetime technical support backed by well-trained customer support, and all their systems feature a 1-year parts warranty. One of their newest pre-builts is the Azure 2, which Skytech Gaming sent over for us to check out. This is a well put together PC that looks great, the BIOS has been tuned for optimal cooling and noise performance, and the cable management is extremely neat. It features the new GeForce RTX 4070 along with the Core i5-13600K, and this allows it to deliver impressive mid-range performance, while supporting all the latest and greatest features such as DLSS 3 frame generation, ray tracing, and AV1 encoding. So, to get the right PC built for you, check out the link in the video description. Okay, so as I just mentioned, a few days ago now, the pricing for this product, the official pricing from AMD was different to what we have now. It was set to cost $300. And I'd actually finished my review at that point based on that price. And yeah, I basically ripped this thing to shreds in that initial review. AMD then called us last week to see what our initial thoughts and feelings about the 7600 were. And I told them that it was an extremely underwhelming product that need not exist. I was pretty blunt, but I mean, that was my review. And I let them know that I was quite confident that within just a few months of the release, we would be seeing 7600s being discounted down to $250 or less. And I probably wasn't the only reviewer to give them the bad news. So AMD decided to change the price last minute, again, forcing us to go back and make quite a few changes to our review. And making matters more frustrating was the fact that they only reduced the price by $30. So they dropped it from $300 down to $270, which still makes the 7600 pretty poorly priced product, not very compelling, very underwhelming, I would say. So let's just get into it. AMD claims that the new $270 Radeon RX 7600 is designed for 1080p using high to ultra high settings, and they believe it provides an optimized 1080p gaming experience. And we're going to call BS on that one. 8GB of VRAM already isn't optimal for some 1080p games that are already available today, so it's certainly not going to be in a year from now, let alone two if information coming out of game developers is to be believed. So that's where we are today. $270 GPUs still come with just 8GB of VRAM, but at least it's not a $400 GPU. Seriously, what were NVIDIA thinking? But as bad as the $400 RTX 4060 Ti is, the RX 7600, it's not worlds better, certainly not in terms of cost per frame. There's really not that much in it, even with the adjusted pricing that AMD did last minute, and we will talk more about all of that later on in the video. I think the only real saving grace here for AMD is the price, which isn't good, mind you, but it is a lot better than $400, and it's why I won't be going after the 7600 nearly as hard as it did the RTX 4060 Ti. So this should afford the upcoming RTX 4060 some breathing room as well. And it's a bit unfortunate the way this has gone down for NVIDIA. Had they released the 4060 first, might have lessened the blow. Of course, we still wouldn't have been impressed with the 4060 Ti at $400 for 8GB, but I think the 4060 will get a more favorable review. So having NVIDIA release a $400 GPU and then AMD a $300 GPU, it's a little more favorable for AMD there, but ultimately not wrapped with either product. Now, when it comes to features, the RX 7600 doesn't really offer much over the 6600 series, the key advantage being AV1 encoding, while you also get DisplayPort 2.1 support for a maximum bandwidth of 54 gigabits per second, which is a 67% increase, so that's nice, but other than that, it's all very familiar. Like the RX 6600, the 7600 utilizes a 128-bit wide memory bus using 8GB of GDDR6 memory, though the memory is clocked a little bit higher at 18 gigabits per second. though this does only increase the peak theoretical bandwidth by 16% when factoring in the infinity cache. Anyway, I'm not going to waste any more time talking about the specifications. Let's just get into the results and then we'll work out what kind of value this new Radeon GPU offers. For testing, the CPU used is the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, which has been paired with the Gigabyte X670 Aorus Master using 32GB of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory. I've tested at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, though we will focus on the 1080p and 1440p data for this review as those are more realistic use cases for this 8GB GPU. All this data is fresh and updated for this review, so let's get into it. First up, we have Fortnite, and here the RX 7600 was good for 90 FPS on average at 1080p, which is comparable performance to a number of pre-existing products such as the RTX 3060, 2060 Super, and a 6600 XT. And this, in my opinion, is a terrible result. The RTX 3060 not only features more VRAM, but it didn't cost much more when it was released over 2 years ago now. And worse still, the 6650 XT, which launched at an MSRP of $400, but for many months now has been priced below $300, was actually faster than the new 7600. Then we see much the same at 1440p. Super underwhelming results given the $270 US price tag. We're talking about a 5% boost over the 6600 XT for what is very much RTX 3060/6650 XT like performance. Next up, we have Resident Evil 4, and the results here are even more disappointing. At 1080p, the RX 7600 was slower than the 6600 XT and 15% slower than the 6650 XT, while it was just 10% faster than the RX 6600. It also got completely mowed by the RTX 3060, where it was found to be almost 20% slower. Then at 1440p, it did manage to match the 6600 XT, but was still 8% slower than the 6650 XT, and 17% slower than the RTX 3060. So I'm not really sure what to say about that other than the obvious. It's super underwhelming and all seems a bit pointless. But let's move on in the hope that somehow things improve. Well, performance in A Plague Tale Requiem is certainly better, as here we're looking at 6650 XT-like performance. Well, it's 3% faster, and that meant it was also 26% faster than the RTX 3060. So this result is a bit more promising, but still, given the retail price of the 6650 XT right now, it probably won't have you rushing out to buy a new 7600. And the margin over the 6650 XT is extended to 5% at 1440p, making the 7600 23% faster than the RTX 3060 and almost 30% faster than the RX 6600. Now, F122 has been tested using the ultra high quality preset, which enables ray tracing by default, and this is the 7600's biggest advantage over the older RDNA 2 GPUs, improved RT performance. Here the 7600 is 13% faster than the 6650 XT, 21% faster than the RTX 3060, and 35% faster than the RX 6600. So pretty good results really, though less exciting when you consider the fact that the 7600 is set to cost over 40% more than the current asking price of the 6600, and they both pack 8GB of VRAM. The margins do improve at 1440p, and now the 7600 is delivering 6700 XT-like performance, which is great to see. It's also roughly 40% faster than the RX 6600, which does help justify the price discrepancy, at least for this title. The RX 7600 also does quite well in Cyberpunk 2077, falling just short of the 6700 XT by a 7% margin, while it beat the 6650 XT by an 8% margin and the RX 6600 by 30%. So decent results at 1080p. The 1440p data though was, well, it was just as decent, let's say. Here the 7600 was 5% slower than the 6700 XT, 15% faster than the 6650 XT, and 41% faster than the RX 6600. Moving on to Dying Light 2, we find that the RX 7600 was good for 81 FPS on average at 1080p, making it just 5% faster than the 6650 XT, 16% faster than the RTX 3060, and at 27% faster than the RX 6600. And we find much the same at 1440p, 4% faster than the 6650 XT, and 27% faster than the RX 6600 with 52 FPS on average. Next we have Watch Dogs Legion, and here the RX 7600 rendered 121 FPS on average, which allowed it to match the RTX 3060 Ti, though it was still 15% slower than the 6700 XT. It was, however, 4% faster than the 6650 XT, so we're basically looking at 6650 XT-like performance here. And the margins are extended ever so slightly at 1440p, and now the 7600 is 6% faster than the 6650 XT, 22% faster than the RTX 3060, and 28% faster than the RX 6600. Moving on to Forza Horizon 5, we're looking at 6600 XT-like performance at 1080p, which is basically 6650 XT performance. So not a great result really, and it means that the 7600 is just 10% faster than the RTX 3060 and RX 6600. And the 1440p results are really no better. Again, we're looking at 6600 XT/6650 XT-like performance, so only very small gains over the RTX 3060 and RX 6600. Total War Warhammer 3 played quite well on the RX 7600 with 84 FPS on average at 1080p, and although that meant it was 13% slower than the 6700 XT, it was still 12% faster than the RTX 3060 and 15% faster than the 6650 XT. And increasing the resolution to 1440p did reduce the margin over the RTX 3060 to just 4%, though it remained well ahead of the 6650 XT, 16% faster in this example. Okay, so here the 7600 was good for 123 FPS in Spider-Man Remastered at 1080p, though this only placed it alongside the 6650 XT and the RTX 3060, and we're also only talking about a 15% boost over the RX 6600. The 1440p results are much the same. Here it was just 5% faster than the 6650 XT and 6% faster than the RTX 3060. The Hogwarts Legacy results look fairly typical. The 7600 is seen delivering 6650 XT-like performance, making it a whisker faster than the RTX 3060 and not a great deal faster than the older and currently much cheaper RX 6600. It was 28% faster than the RX 6600 at 1440p, which is certainly a decent margin, though again, we're only talking about 6650 XT-like performance here, so not terribly exciting at the $300 price point. The Halo Infinite results provide us with more of the same. Again, the 7600 is just 5% faster than the 6650 XT, so we're very much looking at 6650 XT-like performance at 1080p, as we've found a number of times now. Though the 7600 does race ahead of the 6650 XT at 1440p, but these results are somewhat invalid given that the 7600 regularly had missing textures in this test, and the same is true for all 8GB models, and this messes with the results because memory management isn't always consistent, so sometimes there'll be more textures loaded than other times, and it just messes with the performance and of course the image quality. The Last of Us Part 1 can also be problematic when it comes to VRAM usage, especially with 8GB or lower graphics cards. The game did appear to render correctly at 1080p with the ultra quality settings, but frame time performance was noticeably worse for the 8GB cards. The RTX 3060, for example, which has 12GB of VRAM, saw 1% lows, which were almost 40% greater than that of the 7600. And that just means had the 7600 had more VRAM, gamers have to spend less time tuning stuff like texture quality, which doesn't actually impact FPS performance, providing you have enough VRAM. So it can just make setting up quality settings a bit more messy. Then at 1440p, the 8GB graphics cards are completely broken, though admittedly the 7600 isn't quite powerful enough here anyway, so you should be fine with the highest quality preset. Though it is worth noting that you would be able to max out textures, which again doesn't impact FPS performance if you have enough VRAM. So you could get the full texture quality presentation of this game had the card had more than 8GB of VRAM. The Radeon A3 GPUs work very well in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and the RX 7600 is no exception here, pumping out an impressive 123 FPS at 1080p, making it 8% faster than the 6700 XT and a massive 21% faster than the 6650 XT. Even at 1440p, it matched the RTX 3070, though that did mean it was just 7% faster than the 6650 XT, so memory bandwidth appears to be more of an issue at this higher resolution. Last up, we have Hitman 3, and at 1080p, the RX 7600 spat out 108 FPS on average, which, you guessed it, is 6650 XT-like performance. And of course, it's the same deal at 1440p, 74 FPS for the new 7600 compared to 71 FPS for the 6650 XT, so a mere 4% improvement there, and again, at retail today, both cost around $300 US, and are armed with just 8GB of VRAM. Now, when it comes to power consumption, the RX 7600 isn't particularly impressive. It's certainly not bad. It's just nothing to get excited about. And in fact, you could say it's very much 6650 XT-like. There's really not too much more to say here. Overall, the 7600 appears to perform much like the 6650 XT, and here we're seeing that total system consumption was also much the same, so no real efficiency improvements. Okay, so across the 15 games tested, the average performance seen at 1080p, and you'll be shocked to find that the 7600 was just 4% faster than the 6650 XT on average, making it 14 to 15% slower than the RTX 3060 Ti and RX 6700 XT. When compared to the RTX 3060, we see a very mild 11% performance uplift, and then a 24% boost over the RX 6600. It's a similar story at 1440p. Here the 7600 was on average just 5% faster than the 6650 XT, 13% faster than the 6600 XT, and 27% faster than the RX 6600. When compared to the RTX 3060, you are getting 11% more performance on average, though 1% lows were actually slightly worse due to the smaller VRAM buffer. Then for those of you interested, here's the 4K data. The 7600 obviously isn't intended for 4K gaming, but since I have the data, I might as well just take a second to show you. Okay, so time for the all-important cost per frame analysis, and we will start with the MSRP data. The 7600 is now set to cost $270 US, and at that price, it will be the best value GPU we've seen released over the past few years, at least based on the MSRP, so I guess that's a good thing. And if all products were selling at their MSRP, then the 7600 would look like a solid offering, reducing the cost per frame from the RX 6600 by 35%. So that's a pretty great generational uplift there, though it has to be said that the MSRP of the 6600 series was kind of awful. Still, even when compared to the RTX 3060, we're looking at a 26% reduction in cost per frame. So that's decent, but again, that product wasn't particularly great in terms of value to begin with. The problem though, for the RX 7600 is the fact that the Radeon 6000 series of GPUs have been selling for well below their MSRP for almost a year now. Back in mid-September of last year, so almost 9 months ago now, the RX 6600 could be had for just $220 US. So we're not talking about a last-minute discount here. This product might as well have had an official price cut late last year. And late last year, the 6700 XT also went as low as $350, and today can be had for as little as $320. And it's not only faster than the RX 7600, but it packs 50% more VRAM. Admittedly, there's basically no GeForce competition here right now, though the base model RTX 4060 is set to cost $300 when it arrives in a few months' time, but right now, it's all AMD. My problem with the 7600 though is quite simple. As it stands right now, for $270 US, it really need not exist. The 6650 XT or 6600 XT, they can be had for basically the same price. They offer a similar level of performance with similar power efficiency, and of course, both pack just 8GB of VRAM. This isn't anything new, by the way. As of October last year, it has been possible to purchase a 6650 XT for $280 US. So for over half a year now, if you wanted this level of performance, you could have just acquired it for roughly the same price. So what exactly is the point of the 7600? So how much should it cost? Well, we believe the RTX 4060 Ti should have been priced no more than $300 US. And based on that logic, we believe AMD can't ask $1 over $230 for the 7600. So our advice is to sit back and watch the inevitable price drops happen over the next few months. Alright, so here's a quick look at how the AMD reference card performs after an hour of load in an enclosed case playing Hitman 3 at 1440p. The average GPU temperature peaked at 78 degrees with a peak hotspot temperature of 90 degrees, and to achieve these temperatures, the fan spun at 1600 RPM. We also saw a typical core clock frequency of 2560 MHz, while the memory operated at the expected 18 gigabits per second. So, like the GeForce RTX 4060 Ti that I reviewed yesterday, I'm not going to recommend you purchase the Radeon RX 7600, at least not for $270 US. And I know AMD has reduced the price. They've tried to make this thing a bit more appealing with that last minute pricing adjustment. But look, $300 US for this thing, the review was not pretty. $30, look, it makes a difference. It's not nothing, but it's not enough. It really needs to be $250 US at the most. And yeah, it but just doesn't do enough to justify the current asking price, especially when you could have purchased roughly the same thing. You could have purchased a similar gaming experience as far back as late last year for pretty much the same money. So that says it all, really. It's a shame that we're coming away from yet another Radeon review where I have to give it the thumbs down for no reason other than the price. And to make matters worse, I can almost guarantee you that we'll be seeing this thing on shelves for $250 US or less within a matter of months. For whatever reason, this seems to be AMD's new favourite tactic: ask far too much for an underwhelming product, resulting in mostly negative reviews, which not only tarnish the product in question, but also the company's reputation, only to slash prices just months after release, and the 7900 XT was the most recent example of this. And if AMD does indeed drop the RX 7600 to $250 or less within months of this review going live, then I think they really need to rethink their strategy. That said, maybe maximizing margins in the short term to take advantage of early adopters or consumers who don't do their research is worth the negative reviews and any damage to the brand reputation. Surely AMD knows what they're doing, right? Right? As for the 8GB discussion, it's my opinion that products priced over $250 US should be getting at least 12GB of VRAM in 2023. Of course, a 12GB buffer would result in a different GPU configuration in the case of the 7600, but it's something that AMD or Nvidia would have to account for when planning their lineups. Moving forward, 8GB is quickly becoming entry-level, so at most you'll want to pay $250, maybe even $200 for an 8GB graphics card. And certainly let me know what you think about that in the comment section. And AMD even admits and shows instances where you will want to manually dial down the textures on a 7600 at 1080p. And while these compromises are more acceptable on lower end models, I still feel we're beyond the point where 8GB is acceptable even at the updated $270 US price point, and based on polling data with our audience, it appears that the vast majority of you agree. It's also worth noting that texture quality has a massive impact on visuals and is far more significant than stuff like ray tracing, for example. Textures don't influence FPS performance, providing that you have enough VRAM, and that means products like the Radeon RX 6800, which have 16GB of VRAM, might be limited to medium quality settings in a AAA title released in a year or two from now, but you'll still be able to max out the texture options in those games, and this will result in breathtaking photorealistic textures. And this also means in future games, the 16GB version of the RTX 4060 Ti will be able to achieve a much higher level of graphic fidelity when compared to the 8GB version while producing the same FPS. Anyway, as it stands, despite AMD's last-minute pricing adjustment, the Radeon RX 7600 is still overpriced and therefore very underwhelming. And right now, if you want a graphics card for around $300, it is a bit more expensive, the 6700 XT, but in my opinion, it's just a much better purchase. That was certainly the case when this was at $300. I think now that it's like an $80 difference, that's a fair bit cheaper for this, but the 6700 XT, it does give you quite a bit more VRAM and, generally better performance. Ray tracing performance is similar. Really, the big advantage of this thing is probably the AV1 encoding support, but if you don't require that, then I think the extra 4GB of VRAM probably is going to make the 6700 XT a better investment long-term, which for me would justify spending the extra money. Anyway, I do look forward to recommending the 7600 in the not too distant future when AMD makes yet another pricing adjustment, because I'm almost certain they will. This thing will be heading to $250 pretty fast, I reckon. But regardless, I don't really recommend purchasing one unless it's about $250. But of course, again, as I've said a few times now, let me know what you think about the price, the performance, just the 7600 in general in the comments section below. And thank you for watching the video. If you'd like to support our work directly, we have Floatplane Patreon. You get access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&As, and behind-the-scenes content. So a lot of cool stuff there worth checking out if you're interested. But if not, that's perfectly fine. And I would like to just thank you for watching this review, especially if you made it all the way to the end. Much appreciated. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.